Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to begin the afternoon session. Welcome, everyone. I'm really delighted to have this gentleman speak today. A lot of you have had challenges in your families with type 2, but I know I've known people with juvenile diabetes, and this gentleman's going to be talking about his life and how he faced a lot of challenges. So Bruce Andrew Peters I asked him to send me a brief bio, and he did send me a very brief bio, but I'm going to say a little more than that. He's from Vienna, Virginia, and he's an award-winning international photojournalist, freelance photographer, and poet. And he has had tremendous success chronicling and capturing events and stories prevalent in society through photography and the compilation of images. His talent has been utilized by a number of different organizations and publications, including the American Trucking Association, Association of American Railroads, Los Angeles Times Syndicate, the Examiner newspapers, and Indigo Night printwear and graphics. His photography has also appeared internationally in relation to Holland America Cruise Lines, which I love, and Norwegian Cruise Lines. He has such a diverse education, a lot of degrees, multiple awards that he's received for his work, and very interesting gentleman, what he's accomplished with a lifelong affliction with insulin-dependent diabetes. He has faced challenges in life, like treating juvenile onset diabetes at an early age. Instead of being limited by obstacles, he has turned them to his advantage and learned lessons along the way. His colorful photographic presentation describes his 40 years with insulin-dependent diabetes and how he leads an active life, including flying, scuba diving, hiking, ice hockey, and wildlife photography. And he will be leaving his business cards, but you should really look up his website because it's just amazing and interesting. So I'm sure you'll enjoy. So we want to welcome Bruce Andrew Peters.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. Before I talk about what my life experience has been like with diabetes for 45 years, I thought it'd be helpful to first talk about diabetes because maybe it's not familiar to all people. How many people here know somebody with diabetes? Wow, look at that. And how many people know somebody with type 1 diabetes, insulin-dependent? Okay, well, that's what I have, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, insulin-dependent diabetes is caused when your autoimmune system mistakes the beta cells in the pancreas as foreign bodies, and they attack them. And this often happens after the onset of a virus like the flu, and then the beta cells get killed, there's no insulin, and diabetes ensues. So today I'll talk about the history and what I've learned, and about 20% of what I've learned has been about diabetes, and 80% of what I've learned has been about completely different things that you would think would have nothing to do with diabetes, but somehow came to fruition as a result of the experiences I've had with diet, exercise, employment, etc. Today we'll talk about the insulin, we'll talk about medication, low blood sugar, walking that tightrope between low blood sugar and high blood sugar. And here's a perfect example of low blood sugar. People say, well, what's it like to be a diabetic and have low blood sugar? How many people skip breakfast, then they skipped lunch because they got busy, and at 3 in the afternoon they were hitting the pavement? Yeah.
All diets.
Yeah, well, not all diets, but when people are depriving themselves of food and their body is expecting food, the pancreas says it's noon, let's put out some insulin, and then they experience low blood sugar. In fact, one thing I'll get into later on is that often at FAA or NTSB accident investigations, one of the first questions that they ask when an aircraft has had an accident is, when was the last time the pilot ate? And these are presumably all non-diabetic pilots. So there's a certain irony there, because what I had to fight in my life was the discrimination of being a diabetic and wanting to fly. Okay, so this is my attempt at humor. The first part is true. I've had diabetes for 40 years. Recently diagnosed as type 2, that's a joke. Like, I've had type 1, so let's move it up a notch to type 2. And then I created the term type 3, which we've never heard of before until today. So you can say, I learned about type 3 diabetes. Well, what's that? You'll have everybody captivated at the dinner table, right? And then, of course, they're a board-certified endocrinologist, so why not be a board-certified diabetic? So I baffle the doctors with that one. I'm board-certified. But on a serious note, I was the first diabetic to get an insulin pump at the Walter Reed Army Hospital. And the funny thing about that was I was in my early 20s, insulin pumps had just come out, and there were these huge things that you wore on your belt. And they were very heavy. In fact, they wore out my belts all the time. I'm going to show you a slide later on of an insulin pump and that I was wearing. And whenever I went to see the doctor, 10 doctors would rush into the room and ask me about the pump. So I was giving all these doctors tutorials on insulin pumps. And then I was, after lots of persistence and actually meeting with the federal air surgeon at the FAA, which took probably 15 years, I finally got the FAA medical to fly certificated aircraft. And I found all these loopholes to fly without having a medical. And I found so many ironies along the way. Okay, what I've learned, question the medical experts, get more than one opinion when somebody tells you something. I was online last night on a diabetic page, and they were saying, I'm on metformin, but my blood sugars are sky high. Then I went out for Chinese dinner, and it went even higher, and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm thinking, who's running the show here? And I said, are you seeing an endocrinologist? And the person said, no, I'm seeing a general practitioner. And I said, well, that might be part of the problem, So when you get an opinion, always get a second opinion. I'll get into why what I had in my experience that was so relevant. Your mothers always tell their children, eat their vegetables. That's a very important lesson, and it's something that I learned, and we'll talk more about that. I learned about the attributes of being a well-controlled diabetic, exercise, diet, self-discipline, and self-reliance. These are all things that we know we should be doing. With diabetes, you're faced with it every day. You see the importance. I check my blood sugar all the time. I do about 12 tests a day. And so, but every time you change a variable, diet, food, exercise, what happens? Your blood sugar changes.
Do you leak through all those pricks?
Do I what?
Leak through all those pricks?
What do you mean? Like, if I were to squeeze my fingers now, I could probably get blood. I probably could. And I'm glad you asked a question, because I was going to say, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask, because it's probably very relevant to whatever I just said. And if you ask it 30 minutes from now, people are going to say, well, what are we talking about? So, you can ask questions anytime. And then self-reliance, these are things that you're going to have to deal with. I got the condition at a very early age. It was a very adult responsibility for a 13-year-old, okay? But finally, after going through all of this, people will still say, oh, but you have diabetes. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that. And slowly, at first I bought into that, because at first glance you think, well, there's something wrong with me, I can't do these things. But then you start to realize slowly over time, wait, if I can do all these other things, why can't I do this and why can't I do this? And then the benefit of acceptance, diabetes is a worthy opponent, People who ignore diabetes are going to be in trouble. I have friends who have lost limbs, eyes, kidneys, and had all kinds of terrible, terrible problems. Some of them are dead. Okay? But you have to accept it. And the way I accept it is I say, you know what? This is a blessing. This is something that is a conduit for learning. And so to me, I'm very thankful that I have diabetes. And that sounds very strange and counterintuitive, but it works for me. I could have other problems. If I didn't have diabetes, I would have followed my father's footsteps into the Army. And look at all the guys coming back from Iraq with traumatic brain injuries. Do you want their problems? I don't. I'll take diabetes. Thank you. This is my father, the Army Green Beret who served in Korea and Vietnam. He taught me about perseverance. First, getting into West Point. Second, succeeding at West Point, succeeding in the Army, becoming an Army Ranger. Very few men can do that. I'm very proud of him for that. In Vietnam, his Army Ranger camp came under fire, and he got everybody out, before he left. And so he taught me about perseverance. And these are things that I unwittingly learned. I didn't learn about it where I sat down with a doctor and they said, this is what you have to do. You have to have perseverance. All these little things were being planted in my head along the way. And that's how I got to where I am with diabetes. So that's my father. And my childhood was an interesting experience. The father was a Green Beret who jumped out of airplanes. So on TV at age 13, Wide World of Sports came on and they had hang gliding in Hawaii. And I said, wow, that looks like fun. And much to my complete amazement, my father said, yeah, that looks like fun. And so on my 13th birthday, I said, what I really want to do, I want to fly a hang glider. And so, after everything that he did, I guess this seemed pretty tame. And so, I had all this influence about flying. I was just kind of, the seeds were being planted. And my father was doing the monthly parachute jumps when we lived at Fort Belvoir. And we'd go to the Air and Space Museum and see the movie To Fly, which really inspires you to want to fly, And then we'd go to the Andrews Air Force Base Open House and the Flying Circus Air Show. And so on the 13th birthday, that's me learning how to pre-fly a hang glider. And in the background is our 1969 Plymouth Barracuda, the car I wish my dad never got rid of. Okay. So this is pre-flighting. We're checking the leading edge of the wing to make sure that there are no imperfections, no cracks, no dents, no dings that are going to adversely affect us when we take to flight. Okay, so...
Was that your dad too?
No, that was another person taking the course. My father was the photographer. And that was something that, he had an eye. He had an eye. He could look at things and he could see a photo. And I fortunately, vicariously maybe learned how to do composition through him. But here I am at age 13 doing my first flight down, this was Oregon Ridge in Maryland. It was a closed down ski area where they would let people do hang gliding lessons. This is the early 70s when it first came out. And learning how to do a turn. And then 6 months later, we go to our relative's home in Newburgh, New York. And I'm very thirsty and very tired, and I'm drinking nonstop. And I'm losing weight. And before we went to New York, I went bike riding with a friend of mine named Tim Chester. And I was so dehydrated, I said, I got to go into the 7-Eleven and get some water. And my tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth because I was just that dehydrated. And I went up to the lady at the counter, and I could barely get the words out. She looked at me like, oh, what a pathetic little kid. And she gave me some water, and I thanked her and left. And I still didn't know what was wrong at this point. But I was constantly hungry. And of course, in retrospect, I realize now because I wasn't getting any nourishment. I didn't have any insulin on board to nourish my muscles with the glucose that was in my blood. And so my blood sugar would just go up and up and up, and I had all these symptoms. So I lost 60 pounds. I had constant nausea. Vomiting just around the clock. Constant thirst. No matter how much I ate, and I would eat all the time because I felt so malnourished. And I was weak and fatigued. And my father took me to the hospital, and he had to put me in a wheelchair to get me in the hospital because I didn't have the strength to stand or walk. And he took me into the family practice clinic, and a doctor looked at me and he said, oh, you have a bad case of the flu, drink lots of soda. And I thought, yes, somebody finally understands my problem. And my parents took me to the Safeway, or the Grand Union, I guess it was called then, and they said, let's get them these big 3-liter bottles of grape and cherry and orange and cola and all this. And I thought, finally, somebody understands how thirsty I am, and I'm going to get to drink all this soda, and it's going to solve my problem. And so I drank all this soda, and then I got really sick. The next day, I was admitted to DeWitt Army Hospital with a blood sugar of 1,200. 80 to 120 is normal. I had 1,200. So that was my first experience with a medical mix-up. And at that point, it still didn't register that doctors are human and they make mistakes. and it happens a lot. So later on, as a diabetic, I saw an endocrinologist. Now, she's not an ophthalmologist, but an endocrinologist, and she took a pen light out, and she looked at my eyes. She said, "You have retinopathy." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" She said, "You're probably going to go blind." And I said, "Wow." And so I tried walking around the hospital with my eyes closed to see how I would do, and I got to the stairs and I held onto the railing and I walked down and I said, "I'm not going to open my eyes, I got to see how I'm going to make out with this new condition." And, to say the least, it was a very depressing year because I thought, well, this is the end. Visual experiences are everything for me. So I might as well, do all the things that that might tempt fate that you normally wouldn't do, but I'll go ahead and do it because I have nothing to lose anyway, right? And then another experience with doctors was they would say, well, and I knew full well, whenever I change a variable with my blood sugars, I got to test. I tested before I came in here. I don't have a low blood sugar when I'm giving a presentation, right? So you do a test before breakfast, after breakfast, before lunch, after lunch. And if it's high, then you test again because you want to make sure it's coming back down to where it should be. And so one doctor said, "Well, we can't give you this many test strips." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, the insurance company won't allow it." It's like, well, who's in the driver's seat here? Is it you, or is it me, or is it the insurance company? And so they were more worried about financial considerations than they were about my well-being. And I've had diabetes for 45 years. I must be doing something right. But that was another example. And finally, I applied for and it was accepted for a management position with United Airlines. And the most amazing thing happened. They told me, well, before you can start employment, because of your diabetes, you're going to have to do a medical exam. Now, this is not a pilot job. Pilots require FAA first, second, or third class medicals for commercial flight first class, right? And I had a third class medical. I'd already gotten that. But I'm not applying to fly. I'm applying for a desk job. And they want me to go through a medical. And then my employment got put on hold for 3 months while they contemplated my medical exam. And to me, this is fallative of the Americans with Disabilities Act, because if they single you out and they say, well, you have brown hair, you're going to have to go over here, that means you're being treated differently. And that's all that matters, is that you're being treated differently. And so, that was United Airlines. But anyway, the experience that I learned was that you can't take too much stock in everything that everybody tells you, and there's validity in numbers. So if one doctor says one thing, ask another doctor. You'll be amazed. Just recently, I had a veterinarian who wanted me to give glucosamine to my cat because she was having problems with her legs. And he said, well, she's having problems with her hips, so I took her down to Virginia Tech, where they have a veterinary college. And I said, I would like to get your opinion on this. Well, they did x-rays and said, it's not in her hips, it's in her ankles. And we don't think she needs glucosamine, we think she needs anti-inflammatories. So there you go. And they showed me the x-rays, and I could see that's where the problem was. And so it just makes you scratch your head and wonder, and here we are again. Okay, so question medical experts, that's loud and clear, right? Nobody missed that. Yes?
Yeah, I have a comment about the test strips. I'm a retired nurse practitioner,
yes.
And a lot of our patients, I would say, you need to test morning, when you wake up, before you eat, after you eat, at lunch and dinner, and then in between if you exercise. And they would say, well, that's going to require too many strips, and my insurance will not pay. And we would call the insurance and say, look, this is what the recommendation is. And
medical
the
necessity.
They would put us through so much rigmarole and trouble. It really is, it is the insurance company in a lot of situations that steers the bus. And the poor patients, especially those people who have limited resources and limited stamina, they really are compromised in their care.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, and thank you for saying that, because most people would just cave. And they would say, well, I can only do a couple tests a day or whatever.
Yeah.
But that is a very good point for another reason. And that is that there are other interests that are telling you one thing. You know, you turn on the TV, and what are they telling you? Oh, we care about your health. We're XYZ Health Company or insurance, and we care about you, and we want the very best for you. But this is what's happening where the rubber meets the road. You know, so we see this again and again and again. And if the company is advertising a lot on TV, what you will also not see is that media outlet doing any reporting on these issues that you just brought up, and I've seen myself. But who's talking about it in the media? Nobody. When have you heard a story in the news about the insurance companies, you know, giving the consumer a smaller slice of what they bargained for? You don't hear about it.
They give the free test, they give the free meter and no strips.
Right, right. Right, yeah. Well, the meters is just the conduit or the means by which you buy all these strips. Well, and strips, I mean, you know, this is my glucometer. I take it with me everywhere. I have backup glucometers because it's so important. And the insurance, I mean, it must cost pennies to make these strips. They're probably made in India or China or something, I don't know. But anyway, it must cost pennies. Let's see if it says where it's made. Oh, made in the US, that's amazing. But anyway, you know, this is a strip, and yet if you take the cost, if you buy it out of pocket, you know, this is just a little strip. It has a chemical, I'll pass it around, you can take a look at it. It has a chemical reaction when you put blood on it, and then it creates an electrical impulse which gives you a digital readout on the glucometer. And if you were to look at that and produce that by the millions, what do you think it would cost? Fractions of a cent per strip, right? But they're selling them for astronomical sums of money, like, what, $50 a bottle or something? I don't know, it's out of this
Like
world.
the EpiPens, that way they just.
All the,
600 for two.
Right.
EpiPens.
yes, yeah.
Similar.
Yeah, well, they have a captive market, and that gets onto another subject, which we'll touch about later, which is about, you know, who wants a cure for diabetes? The media will tease you every now and then saying, oh, you know, something's going on here, and it looks like they're going to have a cure in 5 years. I've been hearing about a cure for 5 years for 45 years. You know, nobody wants to cure diabetes, and that's part of the reason why I've embraced accepting it, because they don't really want to cure it. If they cure it and I'm wrong, I'll be the first to come up here and say, hey, guess what, I was wrong, I blew it. You know, they really did want to cure, but I don't think they do. The president of the American Diabetes Association has a 6-figure income that's very comfortable, and I don't think he wants that job to go away anytime soon. and you know, there's all these pharmaceutical interests. It's not just the testing, it's not just the insulin, it's not just the syringes. What about all the complications? Think about all the meds for that. Yeah, I mean, there's too many people who have a vested interest in the continuation of this problem. And so the best I can do is to keep it mitigated so that I'm not a consumer in that area. Now, you had a question?
Yes, you mentioned DeWitt, so you were under military.
Yes.
Did you still have to pay for your
No, this is after, you know, as a college student, I could have military care up to the age of 21.
Yes.
And so I did.
23 now.
Oh, is it? Yeah, yeah. Well, and then I had to go on to private insurance. And
Yeah, then it gets expensive.
it gets
Had a
outrageous.
pre-existing conditions.
Right, exactly.
Oh,
And
that's.
I don't know whether this is under the purview of your lecture, but is diabetes more prevalent here than in the rest of the world, or is it pretty universal?
Type 1.
Type 1, universal.
Yeah, type 1 is more hereditary. Type 2 is probably more prominent in the United States, I would guess. Yeah. Because you develop insulin resistance and diminished capacity as people age, especially when they're working against, you know, more weight and more food intake. And we'll talk about diet later on. Like I said, there are all these things that came to my attention with diabetes being a conduit that I never would have guessed. You know, I just would have been like everybody else on the street had it not been for diabetes. Vegetables are your friends. And let me tell you how I figured this out. When I was a teenager, I had 1 injection of insulin a day. And I had to eat around that dosage. So that dosage was my allocation for how much I could eat. And I was either going to have to exercise to eat more, or I was going to have to eat food that didn't raise my blood sugar. And so when we'd go to the pizza restaurant, my friends would have pizza, I'd have one slice, and then the rest of my consumption was like 6 trips to the salad bar. And I would have these heaping plates of salad. And so the seed was planted that this is really a good thing because it's not messing up my blood sugar levels. And so I got the idea, and this was long before I had time for my diet and outlook on what's good and what's bad. At that point, all I knew was I was hungry and I could eat a lot. And that's all that mattered because I was a teenager. You know, so now, what do vegetables do? They suppress your appetite. They're high in nutrients. Who has heard of Joel Fuhrman, the doctor on PBS? Very good doctor, has a great program that he does, and he talks about, you know, why are we so heavy? You know, why is everybody putting on so much weight? Well, we're a nutrient-starved country. We have a lot of food, but not a lot of nutrients. So you go to McDonald's, and you have a cheeseburger, you have fries, you have a milkshake, you have a Coke. There's no nutrients here. So the amount of that kind of food you can eat is unlimited because you're never going to be satisfied. And if you check out Joel Fuhrman online or on video, he has PBS programs all the time, very good, but the reason you can eat a plant-based diet and feel satisfied is it's very high in nutrients. So your body says, I'm satisfied. And then you stop eating. You know, so you can keep eating, you know, all the wrong things and eat vast quantities. I mean, look at what they're serving now. These huge things, these burgers, the huge fries, everything is, the big sodas. You know, it's incomprehensible. But people keep putting that away because they've gotten no nutrients in the process. Healthier source of protein. If you have diabetes, you have to think about kidney disease. And plant protein is much easier on your kidneys than animal protein. Now, one of the things that I find very interesting is the media will constantly tell you, well, if you want omega-3s, what should you have?
Salmon.
What?
Fish oil.
Salmon.
Yeah, that's what they're telling you. That's incredible. Let's say everybody in the earth says, that's what I want to do. What do you think is going to happen to our already depleted oceans? There's really nothing there now. I'm a scuba diver, and I can tell you there's not much there. You know? But if we take that to where everybody buys into this idea, and we all go for eating fish oil, you know, or salmon or whatever, I mean, nothing's going to be left. It's already depleted as it is. The coral in the ocean is bleached, so it's not supporting life. And the fish are few and far between. You know, I saw a Goliath grouper in the Florida Keys a couple of years ago, and they're huge. In fact, I thought it was a piece of coral moving at me at first because it was so big. And I told somebody about it, and the first thing he says, oh, that'd be good eating. It's like, no. You know, this is like the first time in 20 plus years of scuba diving I've seen one. You know, leave it alone. I hope somebody else can see it too, you know, before somebody kills it. But guess what? Flax seeds are renewable. You know, you can grow them endlessly. And they're very high in omega-3s. So you can put flaxseed on your cereal, on your salad, and you're getting omega-3s. But you know, what they want you to believe is you have to go in this direction because there are interests behind selling fish oil.
As I understand it though, although flaxseed is very good, you have to grind it before you can use it, otherwise it'll